April 12, 1942. Bethlehem Fairfield Shipyard, Baltimore, Maryland. The air was thick with the metallic tang of steel and the acrid smoke of welding torches, curling in spirals toward the cavernous roof. The rhythmic clanging of hammers echoed against the steel ribs of half-finished Liberty ships, bouncing off scaffolding that reached 30 feet above the concrete floor. A young shipyard engineer, Emery Winslow, wiped sweat from his brow with a grease-stained rag, squinting against the glare of the molten steel pouring from his arc welder. Sparks danced across his gloves like fireflies caught in a jar, each one landing with a hiss and sizzle on the nearby decks. Winslow's eyes flicked across the yard. Hundreds of men moved with precise choreography around him, riveters swinging heavy pneumatic hammers, welders bending over metal frames, apprentices dragging sections of hulls across the cavernous space. Every sound was a heartbeat in the orchestra of war production, every motion a note in a symphony of urgency. Overhead, the scent of ozone mingled with the stench of burning flux, and somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, just a routine drill, but it made every man pause, muscles taut, hearts quickened. Emery's mind, however, wasn't on the drill. It was on the blueprint sprawled across a nearby crate, a radical new idea he had sketched the night before. Instead of assembling Liberty ships piece by piece in the traditional fashion, section by section riveted together like the bones of a skeleton, he envisioned a modular system. Entire hull sections could be pre-assembled on the ground, complete with internal supports, bulkheads, and even rudimentary deck fittings, then lifted into place with cranes. It was audacious. It was faster. And in theory, it could cut production from 140 days to something unthinkable. Winslow ran his fingers along the welding line of a test panel. The seam was flawless, no gaps, no cracks, no visible weakness. It held the promise of a new era of shipbuilding, but convincing the men in charge, and the Navy inspectors, would be another battle entirely. For now, he needed a demonstration. He called over Sammy Holt, a foreman whose voice could cut through the chaos of a busy deck like a whistle through fog. "Sammy, check this seam. If this holds under pressure, we might just save the war one ship at a time." Holt crouched beside the panel, squinting through protective goggles at the molten line of welded steel. "Winslow," he said, "if this works, you'll be a legend." But if it doesn't, his words trailed off, drowned by the roar of torches and the clang of metal. The demonstration began. A small crane lifted the pre-assembled section, swinging it gently over the mock-up of a Liberty ship frame. Sparks shot in every direction as welders guided the piece into place. Winslow's pulse matched the rhythm of the hammering around him. 1, 2, 3, and the section dropped neatly into its designated slot. It fit like it was always meant to be there. The men around him broke into cheers, and even Holt allowed a rare grin. But the excitement was tempered by reality. Every Liberty ship built before this innovation had required months of grueling labor. Riveters, welders, painters, and electricians worked in staggered shifts, rotating constantly to keep the production line moving. Thousands of men were used to the old ways, and change, even life-saving change, was a foreign concept in a yard designed for routine. Convincing management and the Navy of the safety and efficacy of this modular method would take more than a single demonstration. It would take relentless persistence, political savvy, and an almost obsessive attention to detail. That night, Winslow stayed behind, alone in the massive yard, the clangs and hisses now replaced by an eerie quiet. He traced his fingers over the metal panels, imagining a fleet of Liberty ships being assembled in weeks instead of months. Outside, the city's lights reflected faintly off the smoke rising from the chimneys, a reminder of the world at war beyond these walls. Every sinking U-boat, every convoy hit by torpedoes, it was all part of a terrifying race against time. And Winslow was beginning to understand that his spark, small and flickering though it was, could ignite something far bigger than himself. He leaned back against a steel I-beam, letting the hum of the welding generators lull his thoughts. Tomorrow, he would have to face supervisors skeptical of anything that didn't follow the old blueprint. Tomorrow, he would push the modular concept past the threshold of imagination and into reality. And every day after that, the steel of the yard would tell the story of whether his gamble would reshape the war effort, or collapse under its own audacity. In the distance, a ship's horn blew across the harbor, a low, mournful note that vibrated through the soles of his boots. It was a call to action, a reminder that across the Atlantic, convoys were being hunted, and every delay could cost lives. Winslow clenched his fists. If his welding method could get Liberty ships into the water faster, maybe, just maybe, it could help tip the scales. He didn't sleep much that night. Instead, he pored over blueprints, measuring every joint, every bulkhead, every weld that would soon carry the weight of a nation's fight across storm-tossed oceans. Outside, the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon with pink light, painting the steel yard in a strange, hopeful glow. And in that quiet moment, amidst the sparks and smoke, a new era of shipbuilding was quietly, irrevocably beginning. The dawn light had barely settled over the shipyard when Emery Winslow stepped back onto the concrete expanse of Bethlehem Fairfield. The shift whistle hadn't even blown yet, but the yard was already restless, forklifts rattling, cranes groaning as they stirred awake, and the distant roar of furnaces firing up like dragons exhaling. His boots crunched over stray welding slag as he made his way toward the administrative building perched above the construction floor like a glass-fronted watchtower. Inside, the conference room smelled of tobacco and cold steel. Blueprints were rolled across the table, naval supervisors lined up with clipboards tucked under their arms, and shipyard executives sat stiffly in their chairs. Their suits were clean, too clean, contrasting sharply with Winslow's soot-stained coveralls. The man at the end of the table, Chief Engineer Robert Addington, tapped a pencil against the drawings with impatient rhythm. "Mr. Winslow," he said, voice clipped like scissors cutting fabric, "you've been lobbying for this modular assembly for months. One demonstration does not guarantee reliability. Liberty ships must cross the Atlantic in winter storms, survive freezing swells, and withstand near-constant U-boat harassment. Your method must not only be fast, it must be unbreakable." Winslow laid his palms on the cold metal table. "Sir, the welds are stronger than rivets. Panels can be fabricated simultaneously instead of sequentially. We can cut construction time by 60%. Maybe more. Speed is irrelevant if the hull cracks in the North Atlantic," one of the inspectors muttered. Winslow stepped toward a schematic pinned on the board, an exploded view of a Liberty ship's midsection. "Gentlemen, the stress-load distribution with welded seams is smoother. No rivet holes. No weak points. And because each module is fabricated on the ground, you get uniformity riveters working blind on scaffolds can't achieve." He expected resistance. He did not expect the silence that followed. Addington leaned back in his chair. "You get one trial ship. One. If it buckles, if it twists, if it shows cracks even a hairline wide, this entire idea dies here. Do you understand?" Winslow nodded. He understood perfectly. The next few weeks would decide the fate of his design, and perhaps the fate of the war effort's most vital supply artery. By late April, the shipyard had become a battlefield of innovation. Welders, fitters, riggers, all were thrust into a whirlwind of new instructions. Entire hull sections, once built rib by rib, now emerged like giant steel cocoons in designated assembly zones. Sparks showered across the ground in brilliant arcs as dozens of men welded simultaneously on the same module. Winslow stood atop a catwalk overlooking the chaos, shouting instructions through the roar of machinery. "Line up section C3. Check your alignment on the keel bracket. Don't force it, guide it." His voice bounced off the steel plates like an echo in a cathedral. Men grumbled. Some cursed him behind his back. Others were cautiously hopeful, but tradition was a stubborn adversary. Sammy Holt appeared below, cupping his hands to shout up. "Emery! Navy inspectors want to test the weld strength on the midship module. They brought the hydraulic press?" Winslow hurried down the steps two at a time. The press sat like a monstrous iron spider, arms poised to squeeze the welded seams with massive force. A dozen workers gathered around as the inspector lowered the metal jaws onto the test panel. The machine whined. Steel groaned. The gauge needle climbed like a rising heartbeat. Winslow watched every twitch, every vibration. At 90% pressure, riveted seams traditionally showed their first signs of microcracking. The welded seam held. The gauge needle hit 100%, full pressure. Still no crack. Murmurs spread through the crowd. The inspector looked almost annoyed to be impressed. "Run it to 120, he barked. Winslow's pulse froze. That wasn't in the protocol. But the press continued. At 120%, the welded seam flexed. But did not break. The inspector finally nodded. Acceptable. The word echoed like a victory bell. Through May, cranes hoisted massive pre-assembled modules across the shipyard, swinging them into place with astonishing precision. Workers who once spent weeks riveting endless lines of steel now watched whole decks settle into position in hours. Winslow walked beneath the towering bulk of the Test Liberty ship, hull number 1226, as it grew into shape like a steel giant rising from the earth. By the end of the month, it looked alarmingly close to complete. Even the seasoned dockworkers stared at it with disbelief. 40 days, Sammy whispered one night as he and Winslow stood near the slipway, watching welders close the last seams under the floodlights. "We've been here 40 damn days. Emery, we're about to launch a Liberty in 40 days. Winslow allowed himself a breathless laugh. "We are not done yet. Sea trials could kill the whole thing." Across the harbor, fog rolled in like a pale ghost, wrapping the half-completed ships in a shroud of gray. Somewhere in the distance, a buoy bell chimed softly, an omen or a blessing, Winslow couldn't tell. He thought of the convoys steaming across the Atlantic, the U-boats trailing them like wolves, the Liberty ships that never made it across. He thought of sailors clinging to debris in freezing waters, waiting for rescue that might never come. This ship, this method, had to succeed. Not for him. For them. The morning of the launch arrived wrapped in mist and uncertainty. Workers gathered along the slipway, their faces streaked with soot and anticipation. Navy brass lined the viewing platform. The test ship, now gleaming with its final coat of gray paint, hovered at the edge of the cradle rails like a beast ready to lunge into the sea. Winslow stood near the bow, fingers trembling lightly against the cold steel. "Hold together," he whispered. A horn blared. The wedges were knocked free. The ship slid. The crowd held its breath as the Liberty ship thundered into the water, sending up a towering plume of spray. When it settled, bobbing steadily in the harbor, perfectly balanced, perfectly afloat, the yard erupted in wild cheers. But Winslow didn't celebrate. Not yet. The real test awaited: open waters, full load capacity, high-stress maneuvers. Sea trials began 2 days later. And that's when everything changed. May 28, 1942. Chesapeake Bay. The wind tore across the water in long, sweeping gusts, kicking up whitecaps that slapped against the Test Liberty ship's newly welded hull. Emery Winslow stood on the forward deck beside Lieutenant Commander Harold Renner, the Navy's chief trial officer. Renner's expression was carved from granite, stern, unreadable, and utterly focused on the clipboard clutched under his arm. Below them, the engine room rumbled like a slumbering giant waking from dreams of fire and oil. The Liberty's triple expansion steam engine pushed the ship steadily through the choppy water, each piston stroke reverberating up through the deck plating. Renner didn't look at Winslow when he spoke. "Welded seams don't lie," he said. "We'll see what they're made of." Winslow kept his gaze fixed ahead, toward the faint horizon smudged with mist. "Sir, we've run every stress test we can. She'll hold." Renner tilted his head slightly, acknowledging but not agreeing. The ship plowed through the bay, its bow carving deep furrows through the water, a steady plume of spray washing the deck rails. Winslow gripped the cold steel, eyes lingering on every vibration humming beneath his feet. Each groan of metal, each rhythmic clank of the engine, felt amplified by the stakes. They were about to perform full-speed trials. Renner gave the order to signal the engine room. Ahead flank. Moments later, the Liberty ship surged forward with newfound ferocity. The hull shuddered, not from weakness, but from sheer momentum, growing steadier as speed built. Winslow watched the wake unfurl behind them like a pair of white wings. Yet his jaw tightened. Speed was only one part of the trial. Renner moved down the deck, boots echoing. Next, turning radius at maximum rudder angle. The helmsman spun the wheel hard to port. Winslow held his breath. The ship began a wide, sweeping arc. Under traditional riveted construction, the strain on the hull during such a maneuver sometimes produced pops or even rivet failures. But the welded hull flexed with organic smoothness, no rattling plates, no violent shudders, no structural protest. Renner made notes. Winslow couldn't read his face. Then came the worst of it, pressure tests. They loaded the cargo holds with weighted containers designed to mimic a wartime shipment, tractors, ammunition crates, steel bars, machinery parts, and took the Liberty into rougher water beyond the bay. The Atlantic welcomed them with rolling swells and icy gusts. The ship pitched, rolled, and slapped against the waves like a stubborn mule refusing to bow. Weld seams groaned. Steel flexed. Winslow crouched along the lower deck, fingers tracing the lines where panels met. The rhythmic pulse of the ocean beneath his fingertips felt like a heartbeat, alive, wild, unpredictable. Nearby, Sammy Holt knelt beside him, flashlight sweeping across the bulkhead. "Nothing," he murmured. "Not a damn crack." Winslow exhaled slowly, letting tension drain from his shoulders. "Let's check Section C next." Hours passed as they crawled through compartments like spelunkers in a steel cave. They examined every weld they could reach. Every joint. Every structural connection. Nothing failed. Not one seam showed signs of stress. By dusk, the ship completed the full slate of trials, stress maneuvers, vibration tests, emergency stops, reverse propulsion, and high-load endurance. Renner remained stoic, his silence unnerving. The sun dipped low, turning the waves golden. The Liberty ship sliced through the water with confidence. Finally, Renner called Winslow to the bridge. He didn't say a word at first. He simply held up his clipboard. On it, the trial results were listed with brutal Navy precision. Under structural integrity, Renner had written one word: outstanding. Winslow felt a jolt, relief, pride, and exhaustion coiled into one overwhelming surge. Renner extended his hand. "Mr. Winslow," he said, voice firm and suddenly warmer, "you've changed shipbuilding." Winslow shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like a mantle. But Renner wasn't finished. "Prepare yourself," he said, "because once word of this reaches Washington, you're about to drown in orders." Within a week, the telegram arrived. It was pinned to the wall of the shipyard office for everyone to see. Effective immediately, implement modular welded assembly across all Liberty ship facilities. Scale production. Time target, 40 days per ship. Signed, Maritime Commission. The yard erupted. Men cheered. Some shouted in disbelief. Others slapped Winslow on the back so hard it nearly knocked the breath out of him. Sammy Holt threw an arm around him. "You did it, Emery. Hell, we did it. The whole damn yard." Winslow stood in the middle of the celebration, watching the workers, grease-stained, exhausted, battered by long shifts, suddenly transformed by hope. Their war effort, often overshadowed by frontline heroics, now felt vital and visible. He couldn't help but smile. But the orders that followed would push them to their limits. By midsummer, shipyards across the country swelled with activity. Modular stations multiplied. Welding crews doubled in size. Cranes operated day and night, their floodlights turning shipyards into blazing stars along the American coastline. Winslow traveled between facilities: New Orleans, Richmond, Portland, training engineers, refining processes, troubleshooting failures. The work was endless, the pressure immense. Every Liberty ship completed meant one more convoy with a fighting chance. One more cargo of tanks, fuel, food, or ammunition delivered across U-boat-infested waters. And U-boats were losing the race. Reports trickled in, convoy losses dropping. Merchant fleets growing. Axis submarines overwhelmed by sheer volume. Winslow read each report with quiet satisfaction, but never gloating. Too many sailors had been lost for celebration. On one sweltering August night in Richmond, while standing beside a freshly assembled bow section, he received a message from the Maritime Commission. Projected new build rate, one Liberty ship every 3.6 days. He stared at the words. 3 days. A ship? It was madness. And yet, it was happening. His welding revolution, once a sketch on a crate and an idea rejected by nearly everyone, was now fueling the single largest shipbuilding surge in human history. But victory brought new challenges. Workplace accidents soared. Equipment wore down faster than it could be repaired. Welding crews suffered from exhaustion, burns, eye strain, and heat stroke. Supply shortages slowed key facilities to a crawl. The Navy demanded even more ships, faster, bigger, stronger. Winslow found himself caught between bureaucracy and humanity, fighting not only for efficiency but for the welfare of the men and women carrying the industrial war on their backs. And then came the night that would test everything. A welding accident in the Portland yard. A fractured crane hook. A dropped module. And a hull that might not survive the impact. It was the kind of disaster that could unravel the entire welding movement. And Winslow was on the next train west. June 17, 1942. Somewhere outside Eugene, Oregon. The train screamed through the night like a steel arrow, its wheels hammering the rails in a relentless rhythm. Emery Winslow sat hunched in the rattling cabin, the overhead lights flickering as if even the electricity was anxious. Every few minutes, he checked his watch, pointless, really. Time was the one adversary he could never outrun. A telegram lay unfolded on his lap, creased from where he'd clenched it. Crane failure. Module drop. Hull compromised. Portland shipyard requests immediate engineering review. Risk to modular program, critical. His jaw tightened. One accident, one flaw, and the skeptics would descend like vultures. Riveting men already whispered that welded ships were brittle. Admirals feared catastrophic failure at sea. Politicians distrusted anything that smelled of innovation. And now a 30-ton bow module had slipped from a faulty crane hook and slammed onto the staging cradle, cracking weld seams in multiple places. If the press got wind of it, the blowback would be lethal. The train lurched as it cut through pine forests blanketed in fog. Winslow gripped the edge of his seat, bracing himself. He could almost smell the shipyard already, the hot tang of molten steel, the oily reek of machinery, the ozone haze from 100 welders burning blue lightning through the night. He would fix this. He had to. June 18, 1942. Portland, Oregon. A gray drizzle soaked the yard, turning spilled sand and rust flakes into sludge underfoot. Floodlights cast long, ghostly shadows across the modules scattered around the assembly zone. The massive fallen bow section loomed like a wounded beast, its steel plating dented, seams fractured in jagged lines. Workers gathered in tense clusters, murmuring under their breath. Some glared openly at the damaged module, as if this single accident confirmed every fear about welded ship construction. Sammy Holt met Winslow at the yard gate, his heavy coat plastered with rain. "Hell of a mess, Emery," he said, leading him through the mud. Crane hook snapped mid-lift. Cheap replacement part. Should have been caught. Winslow's boots splashed through puddles as he approached the fallen module. The damage made his stomach turn. Weld seams spiderwebbed open where the steel had flexed violently upon impact. Plates buckled inward. Several internal bulkheads had bent like crushed ribs. A small crowd stood around the damage. Yard supervisors, weld team leaders, Maritime Commission observers, Navy inspectors, and a handful of skeptical designers from the riveting division sent, no doubt, to witness the inevitable failure of welded modular construction. One of them, an older man with a bristling mustache, crossed his arms. "So this is the future, eh, Winslow? Plates failing from a 30-foot drop? Rivets would have held." Winslow stepped forward, kneeling beside the fractured seam. "No hull section is designed to survive a fall like this," he said calmly. "Not riveted. Not welded. But this." He ran his fingers along the torn metal. The fracture was clean, consistent, and crucially, predictable. "This tells me the weld behaved exactly as expected under catastrophic stress." The mustached engineer scoffed, but Winslow stood, turning to address the larger group. "Gentlemen, this is not a flaw in welding. This is the result of a mechanical failure, an equipment error. We fix the cranes, we repair the module, we reinforce the testing protocols." He paced along the fallen structure, rain dripping from his coat. Sparks crackled nearby as welders began cutting access points for internal inspection. "Think of what we've achieved nationwide. Liberty ships built in 40 days. Modules fabricated in parallel. Production multiplied fivefold. Convoys strengthened across the Atlantic. This accident isn't the end, it's a setback. But setbacks don't break revolutions. Murmurs spread through the crowd, not enthusiastic, but softened. Sammy stepped beside him. "Show em the plan." Winslow nodded and unrolled a blueprint case under the shelter of a crane tower. Sheets of diagrams fluttered in the wind as he weighed them down with metal bolts. "Here's what we do," he said. "We cut out the damaged plate sections. We re-weld internal bulkheads using staggered reinforcement seams. We add a temporary brace to relieve stress during reattachment. And we inspect every crane hook in the yard before another lift is authorized." A Maritime Commission officer stepped forward. "And how long will repairs take?" Winslow didn't hesitate, though. 3 days. Even Sammy's eyebrows shot up. 3 days? Winslow re-rolled a sleeve. "We start now." What followed was not engineering. It was combat. Welders swarmed the wounded bow module like medics on a battlefield. Torches hissed. Sparks burst in showers of orange and white. Rain hammered the steel plates, sending up steam as water met molten metal. The clatter of grinders and the rhythmic pound of hammers merged with the ocean wind howling through the yard's cranes. Winslow worked alongside them, cutting, welding, sketching new diagrams on steel plates with chalk. At one point, he crawled inside the cramped forward compartment, lying on his back while welding overhead. Hot slag rolled down his gloves and stung his forearms. Pain meant nothing now. Sammy called out from outside the module. "Emery! Bulkhead C looks worse than we thought. Plate deformations deeper." Winslow's voice echoed inside the steel cavity. "We'll brace and reform it. Bring the hydraulic spreaders." They worked for hours, reshaping the steel with brute mechanical force, pushing, pulling, bending it back into alignment before sealing the seams with thick, humming weld beads. Smoke mixed with rain, forming a mist that clung to the yard like ghostly fog. By midnight, lights flickered on across every adjacent building. Workers from other divisions poured in to help, fitters, riggers, even some from the skeptical riveting crews. A riveter approached Winslow, grizzled face softened by sincerity. "Winslow, didn't expect to see you shoulder to shoulder with the Weld boys. Respect. Need a hand with that brace?" Winslow nodded. "Grab a clamp." The two men worked together in silence. The revolution had moved beyond theory. It was now proven by action, sweat, and steel. The storm passed by dawn on the third day, leaving the entire yard bathed in pale sunlight. Gulls circled overhead, cawing across the quiet air. The bow module stood fully repaired. And not merely repaired, stronger than before. New plates gleamed silver against the darker original hull. Reinforced weld beads shone like raised veins. Internal bracing was invisible from the outside, but Winslow knew its strength intimately. The Maritime Commission inspectors circled the module. Tape measures stretched. Stress gauges were applied. Welds were probed, tapped, scanned. Finally, the lead inspector turned to Winslow. "It's good," he said. Then louder, "It's approved." A cheer erupted across the yard. Men clapped each other on the back. Sammy released a breath he'd been holding for 2 days. A few welders simply slumped onto crates, exhausted beyond celebration. The riveter shook Winslow's hand. "Damn fine work." Winslow nodded, sweat and soot streaked across his face. But before he could speak, a runner approached with a new message from Washington. "Sir," the young man said breathlessly, "the Maritime Commission requests immediate report. Sub-losses rising in the Atlantic. Slowdowns not acceptable. They want you in D.C. to help coordinate national rollout of the 40-day schedule." Winslow stared at the message, heart pounding with the weight of responsibility. Sammy elbowed him lightly. "Looks like you're getting promoted to national headache, Emery." He grinned softly. "Someone's gotta do it." The months that followed blurred into an industrial storm. Winslow traveled from coast to coast, Oakland to Mobile, Baltimore to Vancouver, standardizing modular production, implementing welding protocols, preventing mishaps, and training thousands of new workers, many of them women, many never having touched a torch before the war. Shipyards became cities unto themselves. Steel forests. Floodlit wonderlands. Hives of noise and fire and purpose. Liberty ships launched so frequently the ceremonies felt like clockwork. A champagne bottle, a name announced, a slide down greased rails into the water. More than one launched before its paint had fully dried. Convoy losses plummeted. Supply lines stabilized. The German U-boat fleet was overwhelmed. The Allies didn't win the Battle of the Atlantic with guns. They won it with welders. With cranes. With men and women who turned raw steel into lifelines. And with the quiet genius of a young engineer who believed the old ways weren't good enough. December 31, 1944. Bethlehem Fairfield Shipyard. Winslow stood alone on a catwalk overlooking the yard where everything had begun. Snow dusted the ground, muting the clangor of night shift welding. Below him, the 748th Liberty ship was nearing completion, assembled in a timeframe so short it would have been considered science fiction just a few years earlier. He leaned on the railing, breath frosting in the cold air. For the first time in months, he allowed the quiet to settle. Sammy appeared beside him, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "Hell of a view, isn't it?" Winslow nodded. "Hard to believe how far we've come." Sammy chuckled. "You know, I heard someone say the other day that welded modular construction wasn't just an innovation, it was an act of defiance." Winslow smiled. "Against what?" "Against time," Sammy said. "And we won." Winslow gazed across the yard, cranes swinging, arcs flashing, steel plates shimmering under floodlights. A kingdom of sparks. "Not just me," he said quietly. "All of us." Sammy smirked. "Yeah, but someone had to light the fuse." The night sky flashed with distant fireworks as the city celebrated the coming new year. Winslow watched them reflect across the steel hull below, each burst of light dancing over the welds that had changed the world. The revolution hadn't been loud. It hadn't been glamorous. It was built one seam at a time. By ordinary heroes with torches in their hands.